and live from Berlin, Brussels, and London. It's ZN Live. Today, we are very, very excited to have Jon Worth in the flesh, because Jon was, of course, there in spirit during the ZN 25th EU Influencer event. We heard your thoughts on Mastodon. We're very happy to have you here. Jon is number 3 on the ranking, despite leaving X Twitter. But he's extremely on Mastodon's LinkedIn. And of course, you're an expert in transport, in the whole of the railway system, having navigated and shared your adventures on these different social media. So very, very happy to have you here. So Jon, how are you feeling today about Mastodon? Is that your new home, or are you still not entirely sure?
I'm still not entirely sure. Now, Mastodon works really well in what I need to do in some circumstances. Mastodon is really good for the person-to-person genuine social connection, like at eye level. It's a genuine social network. What it's much less good for, which is what we actually appreciated partly on Twitter as well, is that connection with people who were themselves somehow very influential from what they did offline. Commissioners, members of the European Parliament, high-level journalists, I don't know, the Dalai Lama, right? I was never at an eye level with the Dalai Lama, but it was quite nice to be able to read what the Dalai Lama might be saying. Those people are not present on Mastodon. Right now, the people that are present on Mastodon are technical experts, people who are really good at their theme, their topic, and you can have a fair connection at eye level. And so those people that help me with the detailed, very nerdy policy things I do on an everyday basis, they are there, they are active, and that aspect really, really works, and works very well. Now, it's also worth saying that the Mastodon user experience, even in the now 9 months I've been using it intensively, the user experience has also improved enormously over that period. It was very clunky and slow at the beginning, but now the apps you can use to access Mastodon are so very, very good that the user experience has improved enormously as well. So basically, the thing that's missing is what you might call parasocial, the thing where you're kind of having a sort of social engagement, but with someone who you don't know, like the relationship like a fan has with a pop star. That parasocial is missing on Mastodon, but the genuinely social and a good user experience, we have those very much already.
Yeah, I think this was a big topic of discussion during the event, but also it keeps being the conversation online. And I think where we were during the event was that there was a question. We said, should I stay or should I go from X Twitter? And the big problem of a lot of people is it is still the space where most EU people's attention are taking place or are focused. There are still most of the commissioners, the journalists, a mix of different people. So there's a lot of legacy engagement, although all these people are by and large uncomfortable. Maybe not all, there are a few exceptions, but most people are uncomfortable with what's happening. A lot of the uncertainty is making them uncomfortable. They are looking at LinkedIn and thinking, this feels a little safer. It's professional. It's kind of like, less aggressive in terms of engagement. And, we're seeing
and it's also really boring. It's horribly boring. Now, the difficulty I have with it is Twitter, when it was good, was a lively and engaging and interesting space, right? Something happens in the news and you've got people telling you what that means. You've got people making jokes about it. You can engage with people who are real experts on that topic and work it out. It moves fast and there's edge to it and humor. You never get that on LinkedIn, or I never get that on LinkedIn, right? It's dry, it's serious. It also, to my extent as well, it revolves too much around the individual people. So if you take, for example, the transport policy I work on, right, I follow some senior executives from railway companies, and it's all about them going and visiting things. It is never an analysis of what happened in the news today and what does that mean, right? Now, so that therefore it's not the place to really follow policy discussion in the Brussels EU bubble either, right? Like some of these controversial votes that we've had in Brussels EU politics in recent times, like the restoring nature law, for example, which was highly controversial. LinkedIn was not a good place to follow that, right, when it was happening in real time, right? Now, some analysis later on, maybe, yeah? But to me, that kind of spirit that Twitter, when it was good, that it had, you don't get that on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so I think it depends, and what I see is that there's some people who are very attached to LinkedIn and they've been there forever and they really like it. They make posts that sometimes are comments more. They're not all about my new job and my this event that I love. They can have a lot of different things, and what I like in the structure of LinkedIn is that you can write long a piece of content, and you can get these kind of deeper comments and engagement from there. And I don't think it's inherently better or worse than another place. I think it will. The more it's populated, the more you're going to see people playing with it in different ways. I think there is a more corporate tone, which might be the thing that you think is boring.
How do you follow a policy topic in total, right? It's a question for me for LinkedIn, right? If I want to follow European Union railway policy on LinkedIn, right, which is my main policy area I have to work on, I haven't got a way of systematically following that, right? I need to follow organizations. I need to follow some people. I need to follow some people in some languages that LinkedIn's algorithm is not going to prioritize, right? I can't get an overview of it, right? Now, that's to me, the challenge is not only what I might produce on that network and what I can contribute to a community, but how do I actually follow what the community is really saying? And I struggle with that on LinkedIn. I can't systematize it for my content consumption. Now, Mastodon, I can to some extent. Blue Sky, I can to some extent. Twitter, I used to be able to do so through useful or clever use of Twitter lists. But on LinkedIn, I find it's a bit like Facebook in that regard. I feel like it's controlling what I see rather than me controlling what I see. And for policy professionals in the Brussels EU bubble, I think that ought to pose a genuine problem.
Yeah, and we have two comments from Sebastian Tarnowski, who says, "Hi guys, I heard an influencer say Brussels is for all people. Now they're just saying that LinkedIn is around more. Maybe that's why LinkedIn is made for Brussels. Maybe that's the secret." Now, I think you're right about the architecture, and I think clearly Twitter worked better for certain kinds of conversations. Now, last week we've seen actually health and safety, DG Health and Safety, actually setting up their LinkedIn profile with Katie Owens, who's been very active on Twitter on health and safety. And I think what we're going to see is a migration of these people and departments. And yes, you will have to structure your monitoring differently. You'll have to be following certain key individuals, which means it's a different way of engaging. So you need to say, okay, I check when that person posts or when there's a important statement on this topic. And I think, as you said, you don't want to be kind of sarcastic and use the same tone. I often see posts on LinkedIn. I think, I want to say something. I go, nah, that just feels wrong for the place. Which, again, there are people who do it, and I think that might change over time. So I think, at the end of the day, it depends. The spaces attract certain people, and then when people go to those places, it becomes more of an engaged kind of place. So the more people are there, and because I've seen people being very engaged on LinkedIn, and I think that's going to continue to increase. I think until there's a decisive kind of crazy move from Musk, X will remain there, but it might change and then create that migration. Now, with Mastodon, and I don't know if you want to jump in, Irene?
No, I just wanted to say that I agree with the change also on LinkedIn side. Like you mentioned, John, with the changes that's been happening on Mastodon from a technical point of view, I feel like my personal experience on LinkedIn has it's becoming less and less dry and boring. It was dry and boring, I think, before, when people were leaning more towards maybe Twitter, to be more sarcastic and joking and sharing memes and gifs, etc. But now I'm seeing that more and more happening on LinkedIn too, because I see people are looking for the alternative to Twitter, so they're bringing their wit to LinkedIn too. So maybe we'll see more change.
Yeah, John, we're waiting for you to bring that sharp British German humor, because you have been made a British citizen last week. So congratulations, welcome
German
to the
citizen.
EU.
Made a German. I was British. Now I'm British and German. So
Yes. You're German.
No, but I don't know. It doesn't. I've tried, but I don't come to terms with it. The tool which I'm experimenting with in an interesting way, as well as Mastodon, is Blue Sky as an alternative to Twitter. It's got some really strong upsides and some really strong downsides to it. One of the things there I like very much is it gives users an opportunity to kind of build their own feed, which I think is a really neat function. LinkedIn could definitely, and Mastodon indeed too, could definitely learn something from that. So at the moment, Mastodon has got to be my prime network. That's where my best conversations happen. That's where connections are forged. I was at an event last night and someone came up to me and said, I'm following your threads on Mastodon. I was like, okay, cool, that's really good. So, but bear in mind, perhaps maybe it's also because I'm based in Berlin, right? Mastodon is a German coded tool. It is a tool that has maybe caught on in the German political environment to a greater extent in some others. So maybe there's something valid to that. Now, I know there's one other point I think we ought to raise here, which I think Irem, you said, was raised in an online discussion after your event. What is the problem with Musk, and how can we avoid having another Elon Musk type of problem in the future? Now, Mastodon is really, really good because there is no one person that is controlling it. Now, even if the company that does the software development of Mastodon actually went bust or something like that, the code is open source, so it could be forked, and it could then develop other tools off the basis of the ActivityPub protocol. So there is no one point of failure, one kind of CEO who does something weird who then breaks the entire network. So I think that's really good. Now, there's a question mark over Blue Sky. Now, it's meant to be decentralized, but there is the role of Jack Dorsey, the former CEO of Twitter, who's been present on Blue Sky at the beginning. Now, Jack Dorsey has had some slightly weird political views, not quite as extreme as Musk, but some somewhat weird ones in recent times. So is there the danger that Blue Sky, or indeed LinkedIn for that matter, go exactly the same way as Twitter? It's possible, right? Look at the situation also over on Meta's platforms, right? We can't use Threads in the EU yet, but Threads has said, well, dealing with any discussion about COVID is just too controversial. We don't want posts about COVID here on our network. Now, that's a decision taken at the high levels of the company, and the users can't actually influence that. Right now, that type of behavior largely worries me. And so therefore, from a kind of a network structure point of view, it looks to me like Mastodon is better insulated against those kind of one nasty CEO type of developments than the other networks are.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. As a communicator, in the EU, you obviously need to try and go where the conversation is, and I think, as we were discussing during the event, it's essentially very fragmented right now. Now, I think that because the structure of X, Mastodon, and Blue Sky is similar, I mean, essentially short content with a few tags, I think a good practice right now is to have a presence across the channels, and I would also say on LinkedIn and Instagram, just to kind of experiment, and then you just post the important things across all of them, and then you see where the conversation takes you, and you commit. And if you feel, okay, Mastodon is giving me these deeper conversations, I think that's then that's a great place to do that. I want to pull in a question that we had on LinkedIn, actually, from Craig Winokur, saying, what's the secret to getting people to move to Mastodon when, to me, it seems very confusing and complicated with all of its separate sites? Is there a kind of a simple answer to that? You're on mute, sorry.
which server instance you use, right? You have to choose which server to join when you join Mastodon. It doesn't really matter, essentially, right? You can go for the big, well-known one, mastodon.social, or in the EU bubble, you go for one, eupolicy.social, right? Just plump for one or other and get on with it, right? Like, it doesn't really matter. You can get all of the functions of Mastodon, regardless of which of those servers that you join. So don't agonize over it. Just go for one or other of those. I'm actually on another one which belongs to the German Green Party, but that's another topic. So first, just decide a server and don't agonize. Second, get yourself good apps. Now, this is the most important of all. Now, I'm in a Mac and iOS ecosystem, and I'm using on both my Mac and my iPhone the app Ivory, which gives me a really, really good user experience across my desktop. So on the screen I have here to the side of the one that I'm speaking to you on, I have my columns of all my experts that I'm following on Mastodon. I basically never use Mastodon in a web browser because in a web browser, it's a bit clunky. So get yourself a good app. There's also Ice Cubes, which is a free one on iOS as well, which comes highly recommended. I'm not an Android user, so I can't give you a recommendation exactly which the best one would be to use. But that's basically it. Plump for a server and get yourself some good apps. And then you will find the user experience should be pretty solid.
Great, and we'll share some of these recommendations, so make sure you give us the links in the comments below. One of the instances that we've joined is eupolicy.social. It was the one that Paul Nemitz was involved in, and it was about the EU community, so that if you don't have any other opinion, that might be a good place to go. Now, the other question, which was similar from Connor Allen, who is a big ex-Twitter fan, he was saying, Twitter has what Blue Sky, Mastodon, Threads want, people, and because Twitter has people, people choose to stay on people. It seems to me that all of the alternative place barriers to people accessing platforms in some way. Mastodon is being complicated to access. With that in mind, surely they'll only ever attract small, like-minded groupthink communities at best. Do you think that's a fair point? And do you think it's going to grow? What's your prediction right now? The 6 to 12 months prediction.
The main developer of Mastodon, Rochko, he acknowledges those points. And so, for example, the latest version of Mastodon, which has just been rolled out just this week, has simplified the sign-up process, for example. It explains to people exactly how to go about it. It's improved the web interface. So Mastodon is conscious of that and aware of that. Now, we have other examples of open source tools like WordPress, for example, that powers an enormous number of blogs and actually much more complicated websites, which have become success stories. So open source decentralized systems don't necessarily lose out against big commercial systems. So if the user experience is good enough, then I think it can be made to work. And there is a responsibility on all of our shoulders to make sure that if we're using it, that we encourage others to do so, help people with that process of joining to make sure that it works out. So it's a fair question, but to me, the jury's out at the moment as to whether that's going to be a longer term success or not. It's worth a try.
I have a question about the reach also on Mastodon. Do you think, I mean, at the moment, I don't see it, but maybe in the future, do you think it will be also a platform where we can reach, for instance? Because I think that was a good side of X. That's still the case on Facebook as well, for instance.
It's tricky. I think we need some, if we want to get to a kind of critical mass in Brussels EU politics on Mastodon, you need some people who have big policy clout to join it and use it and drive its use in the same way as Nelly Kroes as a commissioner joined Twitter, which helped make Twitter the predominant network in the Brussels bubble, 8 or 10 years ago. So if you had the one who should be doing it, for example, is Thierry Breton, because he said, I disagree with the way that Twitter is behaving. It's left the EU's voluntary code on misinformation. And then he wrote it on Twitter. Like, well, actually, if you're criticizing Twitter, then maybe actually at the very least use an alternative. So some people who have major policy responsibility and could themselves make a step towards using another tool. right? So there is one German politician that did that, Saskia Esken, who's one of the co-leaders of the German Social Democratic Party. She said, I have an ethical problem with Musk. I'm leaving. And I'm going to be using Mastodon now. Right now, some EU politicians who were willing to do that, then that might begin to create more of a critical mass.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is, in the EU influencers, when we did the analysis, we see more and more of them engaging. And we heard Andrew Stroline, who actually, I think, like you, has a lot of a pretty good follower base compared to other people. And he was saying that he was getting a lot more engagement, given, if you look at the pro rata of his follower base and Mastodon, which I think is very interesting. And I suspect that we're going to see more people try, but I think what one thing that needs to happen as well is that certain policy areas need to kind of attract a mini critical mass. I mean, it doesn't need to be huge, but you need to have the 10, 20 people that matter on the topic being there. So I think we might see that, because during an election time, a lot of people try different things. So a kind of no-brainer would be to say, be present on multiple channels and experiment with, you have a bigger team normally during that period of time. So try to see where you get conversations. I also think that Blue Sky, when it opens up, because the fact that it's closed, invitation only kind of limits its scope, might start gaining some more critical mass. Now, in terms of coming back to LinkedIn, you made your points about the feeling and the culture there. Are you planning to kind of, because I mean your post on actually the EU influencer ranking got quite a lot of traction. By the way, I hope you seem to like the picture that we.
That was funny. Yeah, I appreciated your AI efforts there. It was really good, especially as it made me look 20 years younger.
Absolutely, that's what AI is all about. But I thought you got pretty good engagement there, people commenting, and if you look at your stats, you can also see that some of these posts get quite decent stats. So, are you planning to kind of do a 30%? What's your time split between different channels? What's your thinking right now?
Sadly, I haven't got the time or the headspace to really calculate that, right? I feel that I have 101 plates spinning at the same time. So I have some kind of basic rule of thumb, which is essentially to say I'm putting the mass majority of my time into Mastodon because I know it works for what I need, right? For all of the transport policy discussion. If it's something UK focused, then I'll use Blue Sky because my audience on Blue Sky is quite more heavily UK than it is on Mastodon or on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is, if it's a bit more professional or it's a bit more event orientated, I'll have a go there. And if it's something that's potentially heavily visual, then I'll still have a go at Instagram. But that's basically my rule of thumb. And that then depends on, at the moment, because I'm trying to run the cross-border rail project still in my free time. I'm trying to run for the European Parliament election list for the German Greens. I'm trying to rebuild and reorganize my course that I teach at the College of Europe, which is entitled Online Communications in European Union Policymaking. So I've got to manage to make that work. And so trying to keep all of these things on the go at the same time is kind of, as one individual person who has no staff working for them, that's a hard task, right? Now, what I at least know as a person producing a lot of content, I know where my skills are, right? My skills are in text. I'm okay at images, but I'm lousy at video myself if I'm producing it, right? So I've got to basically work out, this is the content I've got, the networks I've got, and take a quick decision of what to post where, and basically iterate my way to some kind of successful outcome. That's how I'm doing it, but I kind of a more developed strategy than that. I wish I had time, but unfortunately, Phil, I haven't.
Excellent. Okay, so now it's time for our recommendations.
So you asked me for recommendations. There's one that I would like to put in. One of my recent discoveries through my transport work. It's been a great podcast called the Human Risk Podcast by Christian Hunt. Christian turns out to be a regular cross-border railway traveller and encountered me through that. but runs this excellent podcast about how you persuade people to behave in a good way and about persuasion and communication, which is exactly up your sort of street, Phil. So I can highly recommend that. It's well worth a listen. And Christian, I've now met offline as well. A friendly and engaging person, a Brit based in Germany, like me. So that one would be my podcast recommendation.
Okay, so I think we're going to share the title, and we'll share it down in the comments. Irem, what is your recommendation for our listeners this week or this season?
I'm going to have a different approach, not necessarily EU or policy related. A recent book that I read is Stephen Hawking's Brief Answers to the Big Questions book that came out. Well, it's his final book. It came out after his death, unfortunately, but it's got a very nice approach to how he's dealing with these kind of big questions in a very concise, accessible way for the general audience. It's dealing with questions about the, existence of God, the universe, black holes, all these types of things that he was very into. But for someone like me that's not necessarily studying it or has been very into it, it's given me very good insights in a very accessible way. So that's my recommendation.
Excellent. I'll actually have two things. One is a shout out to a podcast called The Persuaders by Anders Kopp Jensen, which is conversations with PA professionals. We like to look at what's happening in the business. And another one is a book that I think everybody should read, which is the Elon Musk biography by Walter Isaacson. Now, you don't have to like Elon Musk to find this interesting, because it shows, I really think, a very in-depth portrait of the person. Walter Isaacson spent 2 years with Elon Musk, sitting with him, taking notes. He talks about his kind of personality, his childhood traumas with his father, his Asperger, his bipolar, or undiagnosed bipolar by his own self-diagnosis, and his incredible mood swings, what he calls demon mode, and some of his methodology to run a business, which kind of tells you that, yes, Twitter was probably an impulse purchase, but there is then a logic that he retrospectively kind of put on his purchase and is now trying to make it work, which means I think that there might be a way to make it profitable. It will not be Twitter. It'll be this new thing called X. But anyway, I think just historically, it's very interesting to read this right now to understand what somebody who has a big impact. There's a big discussion about Starlink in Ukraine, and what is a person with that amount of power doing, and what's his mindset. I think they're going to make this into a Netflix series and a movie, probably. I can see all this happening. I'm not sure it's good for anyone. And I think, by the way, this and the Steve Jobs biography is probably creating a terrible generation of entrepreneurs that think you have to be incredibly unpleasant to run a company, because when you see the way these characters are described, that's one of the features that comes out. So a question for further discussion. Jon, thank you so much for joining us. We'll continue our conversation on Mastodon, on Blue Sky, on LinkedIn, but not on X, probably. Irem, have a fantastic weekend in London. I'll see you all online. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you.